Okay, unmute myself. Hi, everybody. Hope everyone enjoyed that beautiful music. We had a little waiting room music there. It does look like we're starting to fill with participants, so might give it one more minute, but just about to get started. And well, first of all, welcome. But also we'll start with a couple of just kind of welcome and technical tips. So I think we could go ahead and do that. First, just to introduce myself, I'm Jen Adkins, and I'm the Director of Clean Water Supply in the Mid-Atlantic for American Rivers. And more importantly for right now is that I will be serving as our MC for the day. So introducing folks, there will be times you'll hear from me, but also hearing from a lot of other folks today too. So a few just technical tips to help you if you're having any trouble with your sound. A little tip here for working on that. Also, throughout the presentations today, we are asking everyone to please, if you have questions, comments, ideas, suggestions, whatever, please put them in the chat. We are using the meeting version of Zoom, so chat will be the way that we will actually get questions for the question and answer period that will be towards the end of the program. So please do that. Also, do want to let everyone know that the webinar is being recorded, and so it will be available for others after this. And also to please not unmute yourself unless we get to a point in the discussion where we actually ask people to unmute. So in the meantime, unless you're one of the speakers, please keep yourself on mute. And if you'd like to, please update your name if you want to add your organization or your preferred pronouns. That's something that I know our speakers have done. So I think with that, we are going to dive into our program. And again, welcome. This is a webinar to talk about the Lower Christina and Brandywine River remediation, restoration, and resilience project, and a specific part of that project, which is a plan. But to kick things off, we have Marion Young from Brightfields is going to get us going. So Marion, take it away.
Thanks, Jen, and welcome, friends. So I'm Marion Young from Brightfields, and we are an environmental company that does investigation and remediation, primarily of brownfields here in Wilmington and throughout the Mid-Atlantic. My primary focus is investigating and helping to redevelop brownfields. And I've been involved with the Christina Riverfront revitalization for some 25 years. But over the past several years, I've worked with DNREC, the Christina Conservancy, and now American Rivers on a very ambitious vision, and that's to remediate the sediments in the Christina and the Brandywine rivers and to restore wetlands and green spaces along the rivers to create a thriving ecosystem. The name for this team is CBR4, and that stands for the Christina and Brandywine River Remediation, Restoration, and Resilience Team. So back on September 10th, 2019, we convened a technical workshop in the Christina Riverfront with a group of 80 scientists, conservation managers, planners, and engineers to hear presentations on what it might take to remediate our contaminated river sediments. And we discussed things like capacity building, fundraising strategies, public outreach, how to calculate the best numbers for environmental risk, how to develop remediation goals. And I'm happy to tell you today that we have made excellent progress over the past 1.5 years since that workshop. We thought it would take, 5 to 10 years to raise some money, but the sales are now up and we're starting to gain momentum. Our core team members used their own dollars and donated in-kind services to search for funding and to write grant applications. In 2020, the Christina Conservancy was awarded $249,300 in grant funds from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And the Conservancy is partnering with American Rivers, who will manage this grant. DNREC's coastal programs allocated $100,000 for CBR4 analysis of data. And they and NOAA have also pledged an additional $425,000 over the next 5 years. DENREC also allocated $500,000 from the Hazardous Substance Cleanup Act. So these startup monies have got us off to a two-pronged start. We have two CBR4 projects underway. The first one is the Eco Restoration Planning Project that you're going to hear about today. And the second is a sediment remediation feasibility study that is being performed by Brightfields and Anchor QEA. So our presentations today are divided into three sections. First, you're going to hear about the past work that led up to the CBR4 initiative. You're going to hear about the roles of each partner that is working on the Eco Restoration Plan. And then we're going to have an inspiring success story shared by our guests from Annapolis, Maryland. And we've invited them here today to tell us about their project, their partnerships, funding, and lessons learned. We know that our CBR4 program will be long and difficult and expensive, and we'll need inspiration to help us get through the tough times. So in the future, we're going to be inviting more guests from around the country to talk about their projects and help us learn from what they have learned. And we'll offer our story to others for the same reasons. So after the presentations today, we'll have time for questions and comments. And during the presentations, you can use the chat function to post your questions, your thoughts, your recommendations as they occur. We'll record the program, and if we're not able to address questions and comments today, we'll have them captured for future follow-up. And we really encourage you to put all your thoughts in there because it's going to take a lot of people to do this work. And everybody's ideas are super important. So think bigger right now about big collaboration. And before we get into our program, I'd like to just talk about future fundraising, some strategies, and some collaboration. The cost to remediate the hazardous pollutants in our river sediments is potentially in the range of $40 to $60 million. And the creation of wetlands and green infrastructure will be millions more. The 20-acre South Wilmington wetland, which is almost finished with construction, cost $26 million, 20 acres. It was dirty. It was contaminated also. In New Jersey, the Department of Environmental Protection turned to industries along the rivers to provide funding for river restoration and cleanup. Here in Wilmington, we don't have a lot of active industries lining the Christina and the Brandywine because the industries that used to be here are mostly out of business. But that means we probably have to raise money a different way. And so what if we created a Delaware environmental grant writing team? Something like 10 or 20 people statewide who are good writers and sharp prospectors, who have their ear to the ground on upcoming grants and who have creative ideas for collaborative partnering and who could jump on the opportunities quickly when they came up. You probably all have an excellent person in your organization like this. What if that person worked closely with grant writers in other organizations? What if we could collaborate across Delaware to bring in a lot more grant funding to restore our environment? Maybe you're already doing this, but what if we expanded it and made it a little bit more formal? So think about how that idea might work. We're not going to figure it out today, and let's get into our agenda. Our goals for today and for all of this restoration work are to share information, to inspire each other, to collaborate and to build capacity, and of course the bottom line, to remediate pollutants and to restore the ecology to make Delaware a better and more beautiful place for people and for wildlife. So as we listen and learn and apply ourselves to bringing these restoration projects to life, let's inspire each other to think big about what we can achieve together. If we can clean up the sediments and restore ecological functions for these two rivers, the Christina and the Brandywine, maybe we can accomplish even bigger things. Maybe Delaware can be the first state in the country to clean up all of its waterways Okay. So with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Jen Atkins of American Rivers, who is the leader for the Eco Restoration Planning Project.
All right, thank you, Marian. So that was great. What a great way to get us started. Marian's always a big thinker, encouraging us to think big. So as she mentioned, the next part of our program, we want to spend just a little bit of time looking back and thinking about the history of what got, because that history is really important for what got us here today. And to start us off with that, we're going to start with a perspective from the Christina Conservancy. And John Williams, who is the president of the Conservancy's board of directors, couldn't be with us in person here today. And so he's recorded his presentation for us to show. So we're going to go ahead and do that right now. And then after that, we'll hear from Todd at DENREC with sort of the second part of that history. So take it away, John.
Hello, I'm John Williams, the president of the Christina Conservancy, and we are just delighted to have you here today so we can share with you a bit of the history of the Christina River as well as a bit of the work we've done with the Christina Conservancy over its history to help us get to where we are today and provide a vision for where we want to go for the future of our community to make Wilmington into an Emerald City. So I'm here bit of the environmental history of the Christina River and what we've accomplished over the last 38 years. You'll hear about some of the projects we're working on currently, as well as things we've been doing all along with partners and other allies to try to clean up our Christina River to make it a wonderful resource for the community. Prior to the opening of the C&D Canal in 1828, the Christina River was a passage which was a shortcut to avoid going around the entire Delmarva Peninsula. Sailors used to go up the Christina River portage and then go down the Elk to the Chesapeake Bay off to Baltimore. But once the C&D Canal opened in 1828, the Christina River was no longer used for that purpose, but instead became an industrial center where, with the advent of the rail lines carrying the vital materials of steel and coal from Pennsylvania, a shipbuilding industry emerged, which took over the banks of the Christina River. Also, rail car industries emerged, which became very powerful, producing huge companies that provided rail cars for use across not only the United States but elsewhere around the world. These shipbuilding and railcar companies provided much economic benefit to Wilmington over the years. However, it had a downside, and that was a lot of environmental pollution of the land, which ran off into the river. And so these companies, which were booming during World War II, subsequently were all essentially out of business by the 1970s. And what was left was a river that was forgotten. It was a virtual sewer running up and down with industrial pollutants as well as combined sewage overflow, which went into the river from the street runoff combined with the pipes from the septic, and that literally made the river stink and be a place that people did not want to go. And so as a result, people did not think of the river as anything but a forgotten industrial wasteland, and the banks were covered with brownfield with many environmental contaminations which were not suitable for new development. Around the time in the 1970s, people were wising up to the problems of the Christina River and realizing that they could do something about it. This also was the case with the Delaware River. For example, when Shell wanted to put in a refinery along the Delaware Bay, there was a big movement to stop that. My grandmother used to tell me stories about to hell with Shell, and the only thing you can't buy is clean air. So the Clean Water Act went into effect congressionally, and in the state, Governor Peterson signed the Coastal Zone Act. And with that, the attention started getting turned to what can we do with our water resources and the lands adjacent to these resources, these rivers, as we began to think about how they could be restored. And in 1982, the Christina Conservancy began to forward this effort along the Christina River. Initially, the Christina Conservancy's efforts were focused on cleanup efforts, which consisted of removing tires from the river, debris from its banks. And this started, like I said, in 1982. Well, here we are almost 40 years later, and we have these annual cleanups every year, removing in total, about 500,000 tons of trash from the banks of the river. And that progress has led to improvements in the resource. And we're very proud of those early efforts of the Christina Conservancy, as well as the work it does today in partnership with the Cleanup Committee, for which DENREC participates. And we raise annual funds from corporate sponsors to help pay for insurance, collection bags, gloves, vests, goggles, tipping fees. Even this year is interesting because we're conducting a virtual cleanup during the month of April, as opposed to a 1-day, 2-hour cleanup. And we're going to use like the coastal cleanup plan to allow people to go on a hub and record what they've cleaned up and where they've cleaned up and take photos. It'll be exciting. So we're looking forward to that. We are very thankful at the Christina Conservancy for our reliable corporate sponsors of the annual cleanup event, some of whom are highlighted here, such as Naramco, and that is a facility right next to the rocks of the Christina River by Fort Christina Park. Artesian Water, Delmarva Power, Suez, Dow, and a number of others, local businesses, including our Inc. Now Incorporation service. But we've been very lucky to have folks that have helped offset some of the costs, buy t-shirts and things that encourage about 800 volunteers a year to participate in this event. In addition to the corporate sponsors, the City of Wilmington and Newcastle County have been very helpful, as well as state legislators, in providing resources to help with the cleanup efforts over the years. There's about 15 cleanup locations where they have site captains, and they send out these teams of volunteers, often in launches with life jackets on, to obscure areas of the river to pick up trash for a couple hours and bring it all back in bags where they ferry it back to have that taken away. But it's an exciting process finding these things, and I think it's some worthwhile efforts to try to get the river clean. So over the years, the Christina Conservancy has lobbied or advocated for sewer improvements in the city of Wilmington, junkyard removal and setbacks, as well as water quality improvements, and contributed to the Urban Wildlife Refuge cleanup with DENREC. We've also worked upstream with the city of Newark on pipe sewer safeguards across the river, removing log jams, and with the Delaware Nature Society on stream side resident stewardship and water monitoring. The Water Resource Agency at the University of Delaware has always been supportive in providing data and maps. With our encouragement, the Newcastle County has acquired miles of riverbank, parks, and access. We want to thank all of our partners for helping in that effort. Over the years, DENREC has provided for a lot of enforcement actions for violators who've polluted the Christina River. And the Riverfront Development Corporation has remediated stream banks contaminants at a huge cost. Individual tributary watershed associations have also worked on alleviating farm erosion and chemical runoff, housing encroachments, and various mill contaminants in the tributaries. Together, all of these activities have made the Christina River in Wilmington cleaner and healthier than it has been in decades. As I alluded to earlier, in 2017, the Christina River, in combination and partnership with DENREC, began the bathymetric study of the river. And the Christina Conservancy contracted for a survey of the sediment at the bottom of the river, which included core samples of the river, and to augment the work DENREC was already doing to basically provide for the background scientific research needed for future grants where cleanup could be possible if we knew where the pollution was and how to get rid of it. And so some preliminary work has been done to explore different technologies on how to clean up the most concentrated PCBs on the river. These sediment studies were basically done in 2019. The Christina worked with DENREC to hold a sediment workshop that some of you attended, where the results of the survey and a lot of other data were presented on improving the health of the river.
Okay, and so now where John left off, Todd Kaiser from DENREC is going to pick right back up and talk a little bit about the history from the perspective of DENREC's program with the WATAR program. Todd?
Thank you, Jen. My name is Todd Kaiser. I'm a hydrologist with DENREC's remediation section. And what we're looking at here is a photograph of Lower Little Mill Creek, which is a tributary to the Christina. It's one of the projects that I'll be mentioning briefly here later on, but it's a great photo of a remediation project and some components of restoration. But if you look at it, there's riprap out there, and there's things that, as a remediation group where I work, we may have missed. And what I want to talk about is some of the history that got us to the point where we are now in terms of developing, first off, the WATAR program, and I will explain what that is, and then also moving into CBR4. So in the early 1990s, DENREC took on a monumental task of the whole basin management program. And this program was designed to bring all of the programs within DENREC together to work on specific geographic areas based upon drainage patterns. It's a logical way to manage an environmental system, a natural system, and it brings together all this data. And there were 4 assessment reports created: one for the Piedmont Basin, one for the Chesapeake Bay, one for Delaware Bay, the Delaware Bay and estuary, and then also for the inland bays. And the list on the bottom there shows all of the different characteristics that were brought together, that were analyzed, and then reported on. I've highlighted contaminants here because that's where I'm going to be focusing my time today presenting to you. Whole basin management was, I believe, the vision of Steve Williams. Great idea, wonderful, but it may have been too much all at the same time without necessarily having all the right tools ready to go. But as we started thinking about our WATAR program, we realized that we could take the ideas that were created in the whole basin management program and focus them in an area of our greatest concern. So WATAR, which is the watershed approach to toxics assessment and restoration, brings together those broader ideas and focuses it on a specific set of contaminants. We're looking at persistent, bioaccumulative, and toxic compounds. These are the compounds that are the risk drivers for fish advisories. These are the materials that accumulate in fish, and they last a long time. And when they're in the fish, they also have a toxic effect upon this fish, and then also humans consume it. So these are sort of the end members, if you will, the true measure of the health of a watershed from a toxics perspective. That's where we spend our time looking. So the program itself combines the efforts of 2 programs. And the idea of these 2 programs is linking the sources of these contaminants and also the sinks, and then using high resolution sampling methods and analysis methods to link the 2 of them together. The idea behind that is to be able to say, you know, from a regulatory perspective, this particular party is responsible for this impairment and we're going to make them do something about it. Or at least be able to understand, if we're not taking a regulatory approach, what the whole system is showing us and how we can impact and make a positive impact. So the Watershed Assessment Program implements Clean Water Act and the components of 303 delisting for toxics, basically the waterways that are impaired, and also is a TMDL implementation tool. It assesses the impacts of our waterways, of toxics in waterways. The Hazardous Substance Cleanup Act, which Marion mentioned before, is a program that looks, it's the state level CERCLA or Superfund program, and it focuses on the remediation of individual properties. Marion talked about that from the specific brownfield perspective, but the idea is that's a source of contamination in many situations. And if we can control the source, eliminate flow, then we can start to make an impact on improving the waterway. So what is the goal of WATAR? It's broad, it's big, fishable, swimmable, potable surface water in the shortest time frame possible. Short sentence, few words to it. But if we take a look at each one of those, it's a huge ask. It's a huge project. And when we think about the natural environment, it's going to be a huge effort to make sure we understand what each of those words truly mean and how we measure it and how to achieve it. So the WATAR program looks at this and says, we know that if we only make an impact in toxics, we're not going to be able to achieve this. But we know that if we get that first step going in terms of remediation, removal, mitigation of those toxic compounds, a lot of other things will start to come together. So stepping back even further in time, I just want to talk a little bit about one of the initial sort of pre-WATAR projects, if you will, that was inspired by the many years of work of Rick Green. He's on today, and thanks for being here, Rick. You've always been a wonderful mentor and a great inspiration for everything we're doing now. Appreciate the fact that you're here. What we did here was a combination of the Clean Water Act programs, the watershed programs, and the cleanup programs, and said, well, how do we understand exactly where things are coming? Where do we have existing data? What do those data mean? And can we calculate exactly what the impact of an individual site will be on a waterway? So in 2009, 32 sites in the Christina Basin, and again in 2015, 29 sites across the state, but once again, focused in the Christina Basin. And I'll show maps later on as to why. We did individual and cumulative loading calculations for each of these sites based upon the data we had using a standard calculation and ranked the sites. We were able to take a look at places where we knew we had a source based upon the characteristics of those sites, then say, this is the load, this is the value, and then start making a prioritization scheme for where the remediation program should start focusing. So when we took a look at this project years past the actual reporting, and we started looking at whether or not these sites had been remediated, whether or not we'd made an improvement. In 2017, we were able to update that and say we had 58 sites where we knew we had a problem. Through the regular voluntary cleanup programs, through the HISCA enforcement, and through the brownfield programs, they were cleaned up, they were remediated, the loading was removed. So basically by doing that, we were able to reduce the load by about 48% to the Christina River, to the Brandywine River, and that's an incredible improvement. So if we take a look at our top 10 sites, which we're doing now on this slide, thanks Maggie, you can see that right now, of the 10, there are maybe 4 that don't either have a single line strike through or a double line strike through on it. Single line is something that has been remediated for a while, and a double line strike through is essentially, in my update for this presentation, we realized that this site itself, the load through remediation had been mitigated. It's no longer a concern. You can see right off the bat that our top 3 are related to one company, with 2 of these sites co-located essentially and 1 a little bit removed. Amtrak is working with us. Amtrak has committed to doing very extensive remediation. They understand the point of what they're trying to do in the bigger picture. They've taken on a huge responsibility. We'll see what the results are going to be. If you think about the fact that these are at the top of the list as the biggest concerns, also think about when the remediation occurs, when the load is eliminated, the level of improvement that we'll see. So it's really great to get to a point in here where we're going to see a change in the waterway based upon the sites. So in the culmination of our mass loading, our individual site remediation, we realized that if we wanted to get a better snapshot of the sites of the basin, we'd have to go and do a basin-wide sampling event. So in 2015, the WATAR team looked at all of northern Delaware and the major tributaries to the Christina River and to the Shell Pot, and did 65 sediment samples, 25 surface water samples, and 25 fish tissue samples. So why all three? And it's really important to understand, because we're taking a look at a comprehensive sampling event in the media impacted, and then applying the concept of equilibrium partitioning. So the idea is, when a contaminant reaches a certain concentration in a waterway, either in the sediment or in the water itself, it should establish an equilibrium. That equilibrium will give you a certain concentration in the fish, a certain concentration in the waterway, and a certain concentration in the sediment. By being able to conduct the math and making an understanding of that, we now gain an efficiency for the next time we go back. We just have to sample the fish, because the math will show us what the water concentrations and what the sediment concentrations in general will be. So what are the results here? You can see the green dots. For the most part, we have very low concentrations, if no concentration at all, of our contaminants of concern, primarily PCBs. But then you can see a cluster of red and yellow, sort of in the area near the city of Wilmington, right along the big arch of the Christina River. And thank you for doing that with the cursor. You'll notice that the tributaries are not heavily contaminated. And then when we looked individually at the fish data, it was nice to say there's an improvement. There's a lowering of the concentrations in the fish, and there was no ambient toxicity. It isn't as if we had a waterway that was an immediate concern where we immediately had to take action. We had a trend towards the better. So if we think about all the things that lead into or feed potentially contaminants into the waterway, another thing we need to take a look at is the human-built environment. So the city of Wilmington and Newcastle County have been conducting a sewer shed trackback. So sewer shed, what is that? It's very similar to a watershed in the sense, but it's pipes. And within those pipes, all manner of things are transported, including toxic contaminants. The city of Wilmington's wastewater treatment plant has a permit to discharge to the estuary, and their PCB discharge was exceeding the TMDL. So they needed to do something about it. And they were working with the DRBC and had the responsibility through a pollution minimization plan to limit that PCB contamination to the estuary. The issue is wastewater treatment plants don't generate PCBs necessarily, they're receiving it. But the idea was, if we do something similar, track back to where the sources are within the pipes, eliminate the sources, clean out the pipes, then the discharge water that's coming out of the wastewater treatment facility through its permit is going to drop off quite a bit. And our next slide shows that. The WATAR team assisted with designing the sampling plans, assisted with how to analyze the data, how to understand what it means, and worked sort of as a consultant, if you will, to make sure that we're consistently gathering the same type of data, whether or not we're talking about a man-built environment here or the natural environment and gathering data. So the next slide here brings together all the different lines of evidence. And that was something we thought about early on when we developed WATAR, was the concept of multiple lines of evidence. Multiple stories, all telling you the same thing. Maybe what that's showing you is, there's an opportunity. So blue squares are all the PCB mass loading analysis sites, places where we have the number. Go back, please. Thank you. The calculation is done, And in many of those cases, if not all of them at this point, the load is eliminated. All of the water sampling locations, you'll see that we did do some extra sampling through the A Street ditch area near that purple blob, which is the South Wilmington Wetland Project. Marion mentioned that. The red dots, the area showed the 303D listed waterways for toxics and also the fish consumption advisories. The South Wilmington Wetland Project, which we sort of think as a smaller watershed scale type project, is that large area there. Won't go into detail on that, but it is a fascinating project. The City of Wilmington has a great website on it, and Denrick can talk about that as well. The source shed mapping, we didn't put it on here, but basically the idea is within this whole entire area are all of these pipes transporting contaminants. And now that we've done that reduction, not transporting contaminants out to the estuary. So also within this area, we have all of these site cleanups occurring. Some of them are occurring in a fashion that is a typical remove and take away. Some of them are capping in place. But at Miko Drive, the South Wilmington Wetlands, and the A Street Ditch, we implemented things that were a little bit more innovative. We talked to, we can talk about the technologies maybe later on when we get into feasibility stuff, maybe at a later meeting. But what we're talking about here is just the fact that all of these pieces coming together start to prove the point of we have an opportunity here. It was sort of this aha moment when we realized through our 2015 sampling for Watar, concentrations are going down. Where we still have the concerns, it's localized. Also note that John's presentation before mentioned the bathymetric survey, that is overlaid on the river in the background. So Maggie, if we'll just go through the next two slides quickly, it shows us the concentrations in total PCBs in the waterway dropping, but yet still above concentrations of concern. We move on to the next slide, CBR4, why now? The items I mentioned on that lines of evidence slide shows us we have an isolated area. We have our top 10 sources pretty much under control or in progress. We have this partnered group that are working to reduce loads beyond just sites. We have innovative sediment remedies that we've put into place that have been proven to work, that reduce the bioavailability of contaminants. And then we just funded the feasibility study for sediment remediation. So here is where we start to step into the concept of, while we're making progress on the toxics, we could get to a point where we're done with the toxics, and then what would we do? Or do we start to plan now to say, as we implement in waterway remediation, what's going to come in and replace it? Do we make sure that we return it to a natural state as much as possible? So this next slide actually was a list of things to be working on. And it's turned into a list of things that we did, because since our last meeting, we've done these things. We have this planning grant in place. We are heavily engaged with Denrick Coastal Management Program. Fantastic job and great partners to work with for the Watar team. We're so happy. Funded the sediment remediation feasibility study. And then right now we're doing another webinar. We're reaching out to our stakeholders and we're seeking that feedback. We're asking for what else should we be thinking about at this point. So that's it for my presentation at this point. And I think Jen will just slide right into your next part of the presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. And that is a great transition, thinking about all those pieces, because everything I've been hearing about so far is all a part of this CBR4 concept and this grand plan to get this river back to fishable, swimmable. And what I'm going to talk about right now is a key piece that's happening right now, that's just started. So within this grand plan of CBR4, there are two things that are currently front and center for us. One of them is this Lower Christina and Brandywine River Remediation, Restoration, and Resilience Plan that I'm going to talk about. Another is the feasibility study that Marion and Todd talked about, and that the information from that feasibility study is going to be feeding into our plan, and some of the things from our plan are going to be feeding into that feasibility study. And so there are these two concurrent and highly synergistic efforts going on at once over the next few years. It's important to note from the get-go that the CBR4 plan that I'm going to talk about has a 2-year time frame of the planning time frame. After that, we'll be moving into implementation. The feasibility study that Todd talked about is going to take a little bit longer. So that's where, we're going to take some of the short-term results and data out of that and put them into our plan. But overall, we want to create a plan that will be adapted over time. And importantly, that identifies the projects and the activities that we'll be doing over time. So I'm going to take a quick note right now to remind everyone to please, if you have questions, comments, ideas, whatever, please put them in the chat. Just a little reminder as we start into this. And I guess just going back to the mentions about the 2019 sediment workshop, I think it was really then that, you know, we did have this aha moment, and a group of us got together after that. And there were kind of two main things that, at least that for me, that came out of that. One was to see that we could see the day coming when this river would be fishable and swimmable, because you could see all these great results. And we had presentations about all the fish that were now in the river and all the different habitats that were there and different people working on different mussels with the partnership and wetlands through the Denrex program and all of this different stuff coming together. So you could see that light at that end of that tunnel. At the same time, you could see that we needed to make a transition from thinking about this river as an economic resource and a place that's being developed to also being a living river that has the capacity to host all of the life, different kinds of life that we have been talking about. And so that really, to me, was the vision for the next steps. And really, we started asking ourselves, what do we need to do to get there? And that's where this plan came into play. It's a project that is funded by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and others, which you've heard about today. But it's meant to fill a very specific gap between all of the great work that got us here, like the stuff that Todd and John and Marion have been talking about, and that fishable, swimmable future. So this is the piece that is going to help us get there. So the plan would identify the most important strategies and projects that we can undertake right now over the next 5 to 10 years to get to that future as quickly as possible. And to do that so that as we are continuing and even doubling down on all the contaminant work, that we're also looking for ways to leverage that work and to restore the natural features and functions that are needed for a really healthy river ecosystem. Because just because we pull all the contaminants out or address all of the contaminants does not necessarily mean that we will have the habitats and the places for fish and for clean water and for people that we know we want to have for this river. And so that's where this plan comes into play. And so it's looking at combining, yes, the remediation, but also restoration of fish and wildlife habitats, resilience, and I'm adding another R to our list, which is recreation, and thinking about access for people, because we know how important that is for this these particular rivers. So that's where the Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund came in, which is a fund administered by the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. It was created several years ago and through the Delaware River Watershed Conservation Act, which many of us were involved in helping to champion. And it is a fund that was set up for projects like this, projects that improve water quality, that will improve fish and wildlife habitat, that will improve resilience to things like sea level rise and climate change, and that also will promote recreation and uses by people. So, and it's doing that along 2 stretches of very important tributaries to the Delaware River. So we knew it would be a great candidate. In this image here, you can see the Delaware River in reference to Wilmington.
Hey, give me that bucket out of your room, okay?
Somebody can turn their mute on.
You didn't throw up in it. So bring it to me.
Christy, you're not muted if you want to mute yourself. And so thanks to support from the Christina Conservancy and Denrex and other partners, we were able to raise the match required to get this grant from NIFWF and make this project a reality. And now we're ready to get started on it. So this is the planning area that we're looking at for the project. It largely follows the river itself with a buffer along it, as you can see. But we did extend it in a few places to include some things like the Southbridge Wilmington Wetland Park is included there, the Russell Peterson Urban Wildlife Refuge, Banning Park, and there's a big area of marsh and natural lands underlying the big interchange of interstates there. We also went up the Brandywine a bit to connect up with the planning area for another project, which is being undertaken by SHAD 2020 to look at restoring fish passage on the Brandywine. And within this green outlined area, there are over 100,000 linear feet of shoreline, 60% of which is developed, and over 400 acres of wetlands, most of which, 75% of which are tidal and freshwater, which are a particularly rare and vulnerable type of wetlands that we have here. So it is a big area, and the idea is not to restore this entire area. That would be impossible, as lovely as that vision might seem, but to examine this area to find the most strategic actions and projects that we can do. And we'll be looking for opportunities to add natural infrastructure to build onto and connect with and promote some of the very special places and features that are already here. Features like the Urban Wildlife Refuge and the Southbridge Wilmington Wetland Park. Also along the Brandywine, all the brownfields planning and assessment work that's happening there with visions for living shorelines and public access in the future. And of course, we have the entire Wilmington riverfront with extensive areas of natural infrastructure along trails and managing stormwater, and some future areas that will be developed that potentially could have restoration projects as part of them. There's also the whole redeveloping 7th Street Peninsula that's part of this area, and the area as you go out towards the port and the landfill. There's also a tremendous amount of history within this area and along these rivers. From well before the industrial heritage that John talked about. Fort Christina sits near the confluence of the two rivers and is part of Delaware's new national park. And this entire area is part of the lands of the Lenni Lenape. So we're really hoping that this plan can help create a holistic vision that will help promote all of these special features, even the ones that it may not directly address specifically with projects. So this is our timeline. It's a 2-year project that we're looking at, almost a 2-year project. I'm going to go through this really quickly and then talk a little bit more about some of these steps. We're still here at the beginning in the startup, you can see with the red arrow there. But we're already starting to work on compiling baseline conditions, which is the next step. By the summer, we'll be looking at using those baseline conditions to assess restoration opportunities and strategies, so that by the fall, we'll be ready to present some of our ideas. And the gold stars here represent workshops that we'll be holding, like that September 2019 sediment workshop, so a day-long workshop to bring a lot of other perspectives into this work. As we head into 2022, we'll be using all the information and feedback that we've gotten through the first phase of the project to really start honing in on certain areas and projects that we want to do. So that by the fall of that year, we'll have some fairly well-informed projects to present when we have, again, that fall workshop. And then by that time, we hope to will be also revisiting and polishing up our goals and strategies so that by the end of October, we're wrapping up the project, which is the timeline that we have for the grant. So quickly, startup is where we are right now. Our project team has been meeting regularly, monthly. We've started to engage with some of the community groups around the project. We're having this webinar with you here today. We are going to be looking for a contractor to fulfill, work with us to be sort of our data and map creator and create some of the visuals that we want to have as part of the project. And then we'll move into compiling and mapping baseline conditions and thinking about goals. This is a list of many of the things that we know we want to be gathering data on. Some of our partners are already working on this data, like certainly DENREC with the contaminants data, but also people like the partnership who have been working together, wetlands data and data on shellfish. So a lot of this we can gather remotely, but we are going to have to get out there on the ground for some of it. And so an important message today for some of you as stakeholders is that we're going to be needing to get access to some of these areas. So you may be hearing from us about that because some of you might be able to help us with that. Next, we'll move into assessing opportunities and strategies. And these will be for a variety of potentially different types of strategies and opportunities, everything from restoration to some contaminant work to maybe some access related things. We're trying not to predetermine what will come out of this, even though we all have some very good ideas. But we'll be doing this, our partners will be doing this in the team around their specific areas of expertise, but then we'll be bringing the team together to work collectively and really look at where the overlaps and the synergies are between these different activities and projects, so that out of this, we would expect to have a rough draft of the places and some ideas about strategies and approaches that will be needed in some of those key places. Then that's when we'll be looking to get some broader feedback. So we'll be doing that through meetings and activities in the community, as well as through that day-long technical workshop that I mentioned. We'll use the input we collect to fine-tune what we're learning from our baseline and to shape the goals and strategies. And so by the end of 2021, we aim to have a set of maps and overlays depicting those strategies and where they can be applied to achieve the goals that we want to achieve. And then moving into 2022, we'll take a harder look at those areas and those broad strategies to then start thinking about specific projects. And again, first we'll do this, each of our team members will do this individually, and then we'll come together as a team to really look at the places where, maybe there's a place where there is a contaminant project that also could have a wetland component to it. Those are the kinds of synergies that we'll be looking for. So by the time we get to this phase, we expect to come out of this with some project concepts that we think are the best opportunities. And this will be some of the most challenging work we do, because we'll be taking lots of different factors into consideration. But at this point, the projects will still be conceptual, and the aim is to figure out where to invest in developing them further. Which then puts us into the part of the plan we'll be working on refining project plans. And so again, we're looking for the projects that we think will have the greatest impact. And at this point, we'll be looking to develop them with enough detail so that we could actually use those project plans to then go seek the funding needed for implementation, because that's what we really want to be doing, is implementing these projects on the ground. During this time, we'll also be working with our contractor to provide some engineering support, and also to create some of the visuals that we want to relay our vision and plans. Which then brings us to that second Gold Star workshop at the end of near the end of the second year. We could fully expect that each of our team members will be working on multiple project plans and collaborating, possibly with others from outside, likely with others from outside of our team. At that point, we also expect to be having a lot of interaction with stakeholders, both getting feedback from the community through a variety of community activities that we'll be doing, but then also at the technical planning level with partners, engaging key stakeholders. And some key stakeholders will likely become project partners for some of these projects. So that at the technical workshop, we'll actually be vetting the full results of our work and hearing from other experts on any new data or emerging needs that we need to incorporate into plans and products. With the ultimate aim being, by the end of October 2022, having a plan that includes two things. One of those things is an inspiring vision with the goals, strategies, and graphics to support it. And this map I'm showing is actually a video presentation for the Newtown Creek Plan, which is in New York. But it's a great example of the kind of thing we'd like to create, in that it's got great visuals and it presents a vision that ties together a series of goals and projects. And so I'd love for us to be able to produce something like this, but it's just an example. It's a great example though. If anyone wants to look it up, Newtown Creek, it's a great video. And then the second part of our plan, or the second product that will come out of this, is of course the suite of high value projects that are ready for implementation. The commitment we've made to NIFWF is that this suite of projects would include 5 to 10 that are sufficiently detailed to seek implementation funding. So that could be going back to NIFWF for implementation funding. It could be going to other sources of funding. And so as Marian mentioned, part of what we'll be doing throughout this, and especially when we get to this phase, is to scope out the funding opportunities that will allow us to then move into implementing these projects. So that is a very, very quick overview of our vision for 2 years, which the next 2 years, which I'm sure will end up being different than we think it is going to be. So if you have ideas, thoughts, questions, again, put them in the chat. We get to our Q&A time. We're going to mine some of those and come back and ask our team to take a look at them. And so maybe you're wondering at this point, who is this team that I keep talking about, or these partners? Well, you've already met some of them. Marion and Brightfields are part of the team, certainly. John and the Christina Conservancy are part of the team. And my role, if you haven't figured that out by now, is with American Rivers as the project manager and coordinator. So our mission is to protect wild rivers, restore damaged rivers, and conserve clean water for people and nature. And I will be the one managing the grant and coordinating all the various partners and activities that are part of this process. We wanted to take a moment now to allow you to meet some of the other members of the team, starting with Todd, who you've actually already met, but each one of them is just going to introduce themselves and say something about the role that they'll be playing, and they can be part of the discussion and Q&A later too. So Todd, you want to kick us off?
Yes. Todd Kaiser, great to talk to you again. In the Division of Waste and Hazardous Substances in the remediation section. My colleague in our WATAR program, John Cargill, is currently on vacation, and I insisted that he not log in for this. So thankfully, he has not logged in. He's part of watershed stewardship, and he takes on the role of the Clean Water Act programs, the fish programs, and John and I work together as a great team. He's got a lot of remediation background, excellent project manager. So we'll be working on the oversight of the toxic contaminants aspects, but at the same time, as we implement our WATAR program in general, we work with all of our partners to provide technical consulting on a certain point to help make sure that as we gather data to help support this project, it's all high caliber, it's all the best it could be. And we share everything we collect because we are a public agency, even though we are a regulatory agency. So happy to be part of it. And thanks for the chance to talk, Jen.
Yeah. And next, I think we'll hear from Sarah. Sarah, are you on?
Yep. Hi, I'm Sarah Babolas, Habitat Project Coordinator for the Partnership for the Delaware Estuary. And myself, along with other members of the staff at PDE, will be working on this project for general ecological assessment of the area, and then help with ecological designs of the various projects, particularly focusing on more the intertidal areas, but that we're looking forward to being part of it.
Great. I think we have Bob next. Bob, are you on?
Yeah, there we go.
So you're not on mute, are you?
No, I was trying to get the video to work. Good afternoon. I'm Bob Scarborough. I'm the manager of the Delaware Coastal Management Program in the Division of Climate, Coastal and Energy in DNREC. The Coastal Management Program is a partnership between the state and NOAA, and we take a comprehensive approach to coastal resource management, balancing the often competing and occasionally conflicting demands of coastal resource use and economic development and conservation. And as Marion said, we're committed to the success of CBR4, or it's soon to be CBR5, I guess, with an allocation over $500,000 for the next 5+ years for staff timing and contractual funding. And so with our NOAA program funds, we are supporting the data analysis, stakeholder coordination, project outreach, along with development of feasibility and implementation plans. And again, got to give kudos to Maggie of our staff for taking all the behind the scenes stuff and making this workshop proceed smoothly, except for my video.
Yes, thank you. I was going to mention that too. Maggie from Coastal Programs, Maggie Plata, is behind the scenes on Zoom today. So, and next, I think we'll hear from Matt. Matt, are you on?
Yep. Hi, I'm Matt Sarver, Sarver Ecological, based here in the Wilmington area. My company specializes in the assessment and ecological restoration and management of plant and wildlife communities. So we'll be working along with partnership on the ecological assessment and the conceptual plans for the ecological restoration, focusing more on the upland riparian areas and the wetland areas and the species, particularly species of conservation concern and habitats of conservation concern associated with them. I've had a long history in the Christina River. I volunteer on the Calmar Nickel tall ship, and actually got involved with some work with DENREC, along with EA and some other partners, to do some bioswale restoration work at the Calmar Nickel shipyard on the 7th Street Peninsula a few years back. So I'm excited to be working on teeing up further projects that we can fund for similar and even larger projects along the river in the future.
Great. And also, John Herod, are you on?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
So the Delaware Nature Society oversees the DuPont Environmental Education Center, which is on the Wilmington Riverfront. A beautiful place, owned and developed by Riverfront Development Corporation, and they did a great job. And our involvement with this project is kind of the community engagement piece. So we are going to be working with community members and community groups to get a more personal aspect to this plan. So it's not necessarily just the sciences of how to clean the river, but also getting input from the communities on how they might want to recreate with it, or how they might want to access it, or those things that we might not be thinking of as it relates to this project that we should consider as we move it forward, as well as building buy-in to the project as a whole. So when this plan is created and there are a list of projects from which to fund, we have community support in having those projects move forward. And some of the areas that we will be focusing on are Wilmington Riverfront residents and visitors. And if you look in the upper left there, those are trail ambassadors, high school youth that we hire from the community to engage riverfront users and those in Southbridge on learning aspects about their watershed and even the name of the Christina River. And we are also working with the communities in Southbridge as well as the Northeast. So all the communities, or those 3 communities, right along the Brandywine or Christina tidal areas. Thank you.
Great. So yeah, and that was definitely an important part of what we want to be doing, is out talking about the work that we're doing and getting input from the people who use these areas into the plan. And so John's going to be, and his team are going to be working closely with some partners and with the South Wilmington Planning Network and Southbridge, and also Collaborate Northeast over in the northeast side of Wilmington. So that is the team, and they will all be on for our Q&A segment, and we'll be helping me with answers to questions if there are ones that apply to them. And as Marian mentioned, our presentations today we're divided into 3 sections, and now we've heard about the work that led up to the CBR4 initiative. We've heard about this new NIFWIF project that is going to be moving us forward, and the feasibility assessment that's going to be moving forward. And now we're ready to hear about an inspiring project success story that's going to be shared by our guest speakers from Annapolis and Maryland. Not because we think this is exactly what we'll be doing here. I'm sure there are some major differences, but because we think that there is something we can learn from and be inspired by in their experience. And so in a minute, I'm going to hand it over to them, but also please keep the questions going in the chat. And after their presentation, we're going to have some time for questions and comments, and we'll be looking for those from the chat, taking some of those from the chat. So keep them coming. And with that, I'd like to thank Claudia Donegan and Betsy Love for joining us today to share their experience with the St. Luke's Restoration of Nature project. And Claudia is the director of the Center for Habitat Restoration and Conservation in the Chesapeake and Coastal Services in the Maryland DNR. And Betsy is the project manager for the Severn Riverkeeper Program and Environmental Committee Chair Emeritus, and with the St. Luke's Eastport in Eastport, Annapolis, Maryland. So Claudia and Betsy, take it away.
Thank you. Betsy, you're muted. I think you're still muted.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, really
Okay,
good.
All right, great. Okay, so thanks very much, Jen, for inviting us today. We love to talk about St. Luke's. So Claudia, you want to kick off this first slide here?
Sure. Well, I don't know if you all can see the full screen. It's a little blocked on my screen, but this project was, basically centrally located in the Chesapeake Bay. And we really felt like when they came to us with the proposal, it's an ultra urban setting to restore and to daylight a stream. We're like, this will get a lot of bang for our buck. It's in the capital of the state of Maryland and has high visibility. The other proponent, the best thing, and you'll find talking to Betsy. Betsy is a non-professional. She was a congregate at the church that came to us just learning about water quality and watersheds. And she took this project all the way through. And I mean, in the Christiana and the Brandywine, when your volunteers and your citizens start leading, and you guys can sit back and just steer a little bit and say, look that way, go call that person. You're going to love that. You'll get a lot more done.
Well, my hat's off to Claudia, because she was a great mentor to me. But this is a GIS study that I did when in my coursework to try and understand, to fill in the blanks of what this history and political science major knew about ecological restoration. But my history is that I sailed my boat on the Chesapeake Bay for decades and watched the degradation, and I joined environmental organizations to try and facilitate restoration. But I learned about best management practices there, and I learned how expensive and how slow the process is. And so it just brought to my attention that, citizens could help, maybe pitch in and help to speed things up a bit and help find funding in extraordinary places. And this restoration is it treats the stormwater pollutant load in a municipal stormwater pipe system that was draining directly into Back Creek. And what we found there was that there was a dehydrated stream as a consequence of piping the stormwater. And once we rehydrated the stream, we built a regenerative stream channel. We created non-tidal wetlands and wetlands, tidal marsh, and living shoreline. And it was quite inspirational. And these are the projects that it spawned all along Back Creek.
And once again, when you get a group of, now informed citizens, they're like, hey, wait, we got to do something here. And so Back Creek, Little Creek off the bay, has now 2 living shoreline projects and 2 wetland creation projects and stream restoration project that's going to be very big, and we hope we can get it permitted coming down the pipe or not.
So some of the aspects of St. Luke's that drew other community leaders and property owners in the neighborhood were the visible aspects of the success of this restoration. They saw clean water flowing continuously into Back Creek, and they saw habitat, because we also built an environmental education trail along the way, so that they could read the signs and understand what they were seeing, how water was being treated and the pollutants removed. And we also planned incredible plant life, native flora that bloomed all year long or most of the year, and made it very interesting to people who were not necessarily environmentalists, but became so. So a little bit of background here about the primary landowner. I became a member there in 2013, and someone asked me to chair the environmental committee and help them build a nature trail through these woodlands back here. Well, when we say degraded woodlands, we are being quite nice about this, aren't we, Claudia? These were the most degraded woods you could ever imagine, with Asiatic bittersweet all the way at the top of trees, and multiflora rose forming a barrier to the woodlands, and inside burning bush and autumn olive, everything that you could ever imagine. So also at this time, I was unaware that there was a stormwater pipe system draining here. And so once we got to this wall of exotic species here, to build that nature trail, a whole team of us were in there, and we worked about an hour and got 5 feet, and we said, oh, forget this, we can't do it. So we all gave up. And later that day, I just walked around. I was walking to see if I could see what was on the other side of the woods. So I walked down to this condominium complex on a peninsula and looked back, and I saw the stormwater pipe outfall, a 42-inch outfall. And I knew then what we had to do. I knew because I saw the topography of the land and the other aspects of my education prior in environmental organizations. I had attended lectures on regenerative stormwater conveyance, and I had seen projects where this type of ecological approach to restoring a watershed was actually very successful and resilient, because they had been in place for 15 years.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that restoration technique was, let's say, spawned in the Anne Arundel County area. It was a way to address stream restoration that was more closely linked to the topography compared to, say, natural channel design, which was developed by Roskin out west based on completely different approach than what we were dealing with in Anne Arundel County.
So this was what I saw at the water, at the water's edge there, Phragmites, and of course no other native flora, no life, no fish, no nothing. So this is right beside of the church. You see the brick on the left. This is the situation that existed there, with even with the stormwater pipe system capturing stormwater before it hit the property. You can see the natural pooling of the water, where the first step pool of the regenerative stream channel was to be built. Okay, and Claudia, you want to talk about this best management practice that was developed in Anne Arundel County?
Yeah, so the RC approach is just one of many you can take to restoring a stream. We really embrace it in our area. It uses all this is native stone. It's native ironstone when you can get it. But in general, and it is hydrologically linking the upper part of the watershed to the lower part. And I think Betsy said it was a dehydrated stream. Well, this is a great place. This is actually a real sign. That the signage at this site kind of brings the people up a little bit, as opposed to lowering the bar when it comes to talking about groundwater and hydrology and hyporheic zones and restoration. And I mean, it is a way of showing people and teaching people as they walk through the site a particular approach and how it's affecting the riparian or the Hyporheic area. Once this water was held up in the watershed and not shunted through, it went back in and created brand new seeps all through this this restoration site.
So this design plan, I can explain a little bit about how the water was captured to, because one of the major focuses here was to capture the stormwater as high in the elevation as possible in order to produce groundwater. And that's what we do. At the top of your screen is the highest part of the elevation, 25 feet above sea level there. And we capture there 6 acres of stormwater into a perforated pipe 4 feet under the ground and allow it to infiltrate and hydrate the high aquifers. And then it releases in a bubbler that comes up during storms. The excess comes up and flows into the first step pool of the regenerative stream channel there. And then all along, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just want to miss the curb cuts. We did have some design changes as we were working through this site, and we added pretty much all these curb cuts, realizing that this project could really take on a lot more stormwater once it was in place the way it was designed. So you'll see curb cuts in several areas, and it also taps into the stormwater system up there at the very top.
The curb cut that is most amazing to me is the one on the Monroe Street side over there, the big wide one that you see curving. That swell moved very slowly on purpose, and it's this beautiful like non-tidal wetland there that stays hydrated all year round. And frogs, I call it Frog Alley because the frogs are just as happy as clam and mud there. And then it cascades during storms. There's a cascade at the end of it that slows the water down as it comes down off of that 25 feet above sea level down to the floodplain of the stream channel. And where you see the water becoming much bluer there by Fairview Avenue, that's the wetland creation. And then it goes back into stream and then back into, then back into the tidal marsh and living shoreline there. So this is the end. This is about a year after it was completed. And you see how the Spartina is really taken off there in the clean stream that flows into the to Back Creek is perennial. And we have lots of wildlife there that just delights everyone. The other aspects that people love about this project is that we have created wetlands and tidal marsh that are very efficient at storing, removing carbon from the atmosphere and storing it efficiently. And when the downtown area is flooding, and it often does in Annapolis, sunny day flooding, we come to St. Luke's and you can hardly even tell it's a high tide because it just absorbs into the marsh and living shoreline there. Here's some other beautiful pictures of what delights people along the trail. We created a bog from that big bioswale that I showed you previously. The groundwater production that flows out of that is perennial, and it created a bog on a hillside. Claudia, can you want to tell them about the discovery of this beautiful orchid there and how it hit the papers? was really,
Yeah,
it was pretty
yeah. I
exciting.
can't remember what it is. I don't think it's swamp pink, but anyway, it's that classic example, if you build it, they will come. I don't know where this plant came from, but
It's pretty amazing.
taking, this old, and as I love how Betsy described it, dehydrated landscape, and rehydrated it and got water up into these areas. And then all of a sudden the hydrology, those who've studied, it's a great way to teach people about groundwater and how groundwater, it becomes a cycle that it renews, and then it's rolling again. And this groundwater system was restored through this project, and these seeps are producing plants that this plant
It's beautiful.
and there were some planted by the contractor.
It was identified as rose begonia,
Okay.
and it hadn't been seen in Anne Arundel County in 3 years. So
Yeah,
got
it
new-
was not part of the plantings plan.
right. So lessons learned, community outreach. A lot of community outreach is necessary especially in urban areas like this. We had one partner that we had invited to become a part of the project. It was a condominium complex, and we wanted to build living shoreline contiguous with the living shoreline that we were building. But they had serious reservations, and I brought in DNR's finest, Claudia, and other scientists there, and the city, the alderman was behind us, the director of environmental services in the city was behind us, and tried to convince them they would not. It delayed the permitting process considerably, and we finally prevailed after 2 years, almost 3. And this is the picture of the big day at the State Board of Public Works when we got our grading permit.
Yeah, I would say that permitting was harder than any kind of dealing with the public. RC restoration is relatively new approach on the landscape, and it's not as embraced as natural channel design or environmental design or just putting in some concrete.
Well, of course, now they come to me and say, Betsy, can you get us a living shoreline? We made a mistake. But of course, that I can't do that now. But anyway, lessons learned. You can never ever do enough community outreach before you start it. But here's a great celebration day, the day that we did our groundbreaking. And here are all of our partners: the city, the mayor, the current mayor, the alderman, the director of city environmental services, Claudia, our funder, MDE assistant secretary there, the contractor, the bishop, the environmental committee, the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, who were our financial environmental org who helped us achieve the grant, the former mayor, Moyer, who created the watershed implementation plan back in 2009, and St. Luke's was identified in it, and also Suzanne Atkin, who played a big role in my education. So, Claudia, you want to talk about construction?
Yeah, and we're at 326. So let's just roll through some slides. Just a full slide. Like I said, I can provide a link to the construction manual for this type of restoration.
We had the sediment fence up there the whole time. No sediment ever entered the waterway. And
yeah, that's a silk curtain.
Yeah. Okay. Silk curtain.
And
then this is.
And then here's after. Yeah.
Yeah. This is the after photo. About a year after again. The trails. This is the first step pool that I showed you the picture earlier that's beside of the church. The church is just to the right there. Lots of people walk these trails. This is the stream channel looking down towards the wetland. This is the wetland, the trees, the Atlantic white cedars, the bald cypress, Sweet Bay, Magnolia, and Tupelo are all doing really well there. And this is the living shoreline from the waterway. It's 320 linear feet. And I love this photograph because it's of a father and a son on Sunday morning. They're looking at the frogs. The frogs are very noisy there. And it's just delightful to see how much people are connected to nature in this urban space that was previously not used by anyone because no one could get through that exotic invasive species wall. So partnerships are essential in these type of community-driven programs. Getting the landowners to commit to conservation easement was easy in this circumstance because the church has a pillar of its mission as caring for creation. And since this was an ecological restoration, one that aspired to replicate an indigenous Chesapeake watershed, was certainly something that was appreciated all the way up the ladder to the National Church, who also provided $34,000 to help us create an environmental education trail. Watergate Point Apartments was owned by or is owned by a real estate investment firm in Manhattan. It took me 45 minutes to convince them to get on board and let us do it because they saw the value very easily in making their shoreline more resilient and cleaner. Networking, it's very essential to a citizen-driven program, but we had this wonderful organization called the Anne Arundel County Watershed Stewards Academy that takes community leaders and teaches them best management practices in stormwater management, and civic organizations also were a big help. We did, the church did festivals and concerts, and we received small grants. We wrote small grants to environmental orgs, civic and businesses who also donated to the cause. But the most enabling funders were Riverwise congregations, where where my capstone project with the Watershed Stewards Academy was actually this project, and I was funded by Riverwise congregations, the design and permitting process. And then the Alliance became my financial partner because churches obviously can't receive $1 million grant for construction. We applied to the Maryland Department of Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays Trust Fund, and we also were funded there, and we're funded by the Chesapeake Bay Trust as well.
Yeah, I think like two really important structures in the building of any great restoration project is a really good community outreach training of sorts, like those master naturalist things, but this one's specific to watersheds, and then a really good fund. You guys were talking about starting a grant writing co-op. You know, I don't know how it started, but the Atlantic and Coastal Bay Trust Fund is specific to accelerating bay cleanup, and it's 1% of rental car tax. So I can't even take the conservative complainers and they say, oh, it's my money. And it's like, actually, it's not. Some guy from Idaho rented a car and drove around Maryland, and thank you.
Thank
so
you.
The point being is that having, you know, some type of great fund and having some type of great way to train citizens about watersheds is the only thing I can say is happening fantastically in our area.
Yeah, so these were 6 other community leaders that took on projects at the St. Luke's campus because, again, we had at least an acre of land outside of the LOD that needed to also be converted to a native flora. This was the expanse of that area that was adjacent to the stream. And then there was also, of course, the land out front. These are just photos of the many fundraisers we did, the educational tours, the conservation landscapes that we did to inspire others to do the same in their yards and communities. These are the types of individuals that came. We had the Naval Academy midshipmen would join in. They stayed with us 3 years during the building of this, coming over each spring to help. There's community, the neighbors, and there's community, environmental orgs down on the right that were part of it as well. But this was the big day when we got our award. That's Claudia. She's not singing there. She's actually
look like a rock star.
Claudia came to our fundraising festival as one of our VIPs, and on stage is actually the executive director of the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay. He also has a band, and he was playing up there. But Claudia came up to make some announcement, and she announced that we had received a grant award, but nobody could believe their ears because we were all like in shock, and so we didn't say anything because we couldn't believe that we heard her say that. So we made her go back up there and say it again so we could all cheer afterwards. Because when she came off the stage, I went over and asked her, I said, did you say that we won a grant award? She said, yes. Why didn't anybody respond? It was really a funny day.
That fund doesn't work like that anymore, by the way. It's much more structured.
So then we immediately did our press release and named our partners, our financial enablers there, and what we were actually building.
This was very helpful to me, is having the ongoing project fact sheet that was updated, that people could go and file, and I could point press to it, or even potential other funders. So having an online story about a project that lives is really important.
So if you're going to do an urban project in a heavily populated area, it really is a good thing to have signage and a trail that people can use as community green space. People walk their dogs there all the time. I don't know what people did with dogs before this was built, but there's always someone with a child playing in the stream or whatever. Claudia also taught us how to teach children. As you can see, she's got a seining net out here. We work with schools there. This is an 8th grade STEM school class summer program, and this is Annapolis High School that the CERC scientist is teaching them about life in the stream, how life is formed, the whole food chain is how life is sparked in the stream. And after this lecture, he put microscopes on their iPhones, on their phones, and allowed them to see life in the stream, and they were just completely mesmerized from that point on. It was a great day. And this is just more education. So St. Luke's Restoration of Nature won many awards, and it won many advocates of restoration, as you can see on the creek, as we showed you earlier. There are 4 other projects in the works, and who knows, Back Creek might become the first creek in Maryland to be fully restored.
And yeah, and I would, on those award page, I would recommend you all to look at it's the Chesapeake Bay Stormwater Network BUBBA Awardees. They're awarded for innovative stormwater projects. They have different categories: ultra urban, wetland restoration. But if you want ideas of sexy projects, ones that I think will you get a lot of bang for your buck, really draw people's attention. People need something tangible to look at and feel and walk through to get fully engaged in any effort. At some point, talking, just as you all know, you gotta get in there. So getting a big and great project and talking about it a lot is important. That's all I got.
Good. Excellent. Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Betsy, for joining us. And yeah, so many elements of that project that are exciting. From I just was kind of making a list of all the things that were included. There are trails, there is stream restoration, wetland restoration, living shorelines, stormwater management, storing carbon, nature education. So those are all great examples of the kinds of things I think that we want to be thinking about and looking at as we look at the kinds of projects that we'd like to have here as part of the CBR4 plan. So that was a great example for us to look at.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, no, and we'll definitely stay in touch moving forward. I've been scanning our chat and not seeing huge numbers of questions, but there was one in there that I didn't know if you want to mention to the whole group about. Someone was asking about, is there, excuse me, is there some kind of guidance for this kind of restoration, like a guidance document or materials that someone can learn about?
We did run so when RSC, or regenerative stream channel, or regenerative approach, was developed, some contractors just ran out and started building things, and we're calling them RSCs, and they really weren't providing the benefits that the original design did. So we ran a RSC contractors construction training, and we have a manual on the DNR website, and you can Google it, or I can provide it to you, Jen, and you can send it to your participants following the presentation. But yeah, any kind of restoration approach, even as you guys, people have done ROSCAN training, you need to have proper training, and so that it is implemented and you get the results that you want.
I think with that, we're going to open things up to questions. Like I said, we don't have a lot of them in the chat, so I think what I'll do is ask everyone who's still on, if you want to, turn on your microphones and turn on your cameras if anyone's got questions, especially at first, I guess, for Betsy and Claudia. Because I think, Claudia, you said there's something you need to run to. So if there are any questions for Betsy or Claudia, you want to turn on your mic and pose them, or if you want to use the raise hand function, we can look for that.
Jen, this is Todd. I don't know how to do the raise hand thing. I can't find it. So maybe I'll just ask the question.
Okay. Go for it.
Thank you. You mentioned, Claudia, the concept of having something tangible to show the public and get that support. I'm looking at some of the things we have to do in this particular area, and because of the toxic component, some locations may not be ready to do something tangible right away. So what were your thoughts on strategizing towards the promise of something in the future. What were your thoughts on that idea?
I don't know. I mean, if toxics are keeping people from the river, I would do a training around toxics, bring them to the river and train them how to properly understand why they are here, how they could be toxic. And you're just sort of shining a flashlight into the future and saying, people don't understand. We don't have the toxic conversation with nitrogen and phosphorus, our big TMDL. That's what funds, all our efforts fund that. And we hope we get habitat uplift, or we plan on it with all our projects. But in your case, with your toxic focus, you hope to get habitat uplift. And I would try to create a series of events or trainings that have people where things are bad and where things are good or got better. We used to do restoration stream education where you take them to a really bad stream in the morning and in the same watershed, end your workshop either an hour later or a half a day or a day later in a really nice area, but you're still in the same watershed. And people can connect psychologically to the issue that you think about so easily. And then you're going to get more, I guess, what would I say, people backing up these expensive efforts, understanding that where toxics are and what they look like. Even if it's
thanks, Claudia. Yeah, that's a really good point. Sort of that concept of sharing, showing what it is now and then showing places within the watershed itself where you can see there's an improvement, because we have been able to do that locally, but maybe just combining the two in the training as opposed to saying, well, here's all the stuff that's bad and you should look at it. No, transplant them if you will, a little bit.
We run a lot of van trips. I don't know, you guys have DENREC, but we have a lot of vans. We pile a lot of the faith-based people instead. Well, I had to take a lot of Betsy's friends in the vans and say, this is what a regenerative stream looks like. Yours is not even above ground, where a stream's been daylighted. A lot of education went into this because people don't like what they don't know. I mean, we had a whole community fought this thing to the end. And so you can't see in the slide, but we had to pull the living shoreline design off their shoreline. That's how just horrified they were. And then in the end, they're like, oh, wait, that's what you wanted to build. So it's just, I call it the allegory of the cave. You're outside the cave. So you're trying to convince the cave, you're not gonna, what is a toxic and what does it look like? Toxic or polluted environment, and what could it look like?
Great. We'll work on that, and then we'll share whatever we came up with in a year or so with you, maybe. How about that?
Yeah.
Great.
I see that Joe has his hand up. Joe Butera, do you want to chime in, Joe?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Joe Butera with the Christina Conservancy. I just wanted to share something with everyone. A few of the speakers today talked about the South Bridge Wetlands Park that's being worked on, and it's part of the CBR4 project. I'm going to use that new term. And I have been a supporter of the Nature Conservancy for many, many years. And I opened up a recent publication that I received, and lo and behold, I don't know if people can see this. And the very front page, after I opened the cover, was an article in the Nature Conservancy magazine about the Wilmington Wetlands project, Southbridge project. So I just want to share that. I thought that was great that an organization of that caliber picked up on what we're doing here in Wilmington, Delaware, and had it in their magazine. I just want to share that with everyone. I was really impressed.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. I had not seen that. So that is, I knew that the Nature Conservancy was part of some of the work there, but that's great. I have to see if I can get my hands on that.
Yeah, Jeff Flynn from the Economic Development part of the city of Wilmington, I guess, authored this article.
Nice. Yeah, Marion put in the chat a note about that the Nature Conservancy contributed funding to that project. So here is a good question for us on the project team, and I'll throw it out there and see if any one of our team members wants to tackle it. If not, I'll try, but it's coming from, I think, Deb Martin, about what stage do you see a role for historic preservation planning?
I'm going to unmute myself and answer that question. So there's a role for everybody here, and we just have to figure out where to plug in. So one of the things that I have been so impressed with the St. Luke's project is it never occurred to me that a faith-based organization would take a lead role in creating a new stream channel like this. Betsy's going, why not? But I mean, it never occurred to me until I saw that presentation, and I'm like, wow. How could faith-based organizations in Delaware take a role? Are they? I have no idea. Like, it never was anything I've heard of before. So historic preservationists can also take a role. And I know, Deb, you're pretty involved with the whole Harriet Tubman Trail. And I just watched the movie on Harriet Tubman. I was amazed. And I realized that she walked all the way, you know, from Maryland to Delaware and along the river. And so there's got to be conservation areas for historic preservation that we can have the trail spotlight. And there's probably many other ways too, but that's one that just occurs to me this minute.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, definitely something that has occurred to me is, you know, especially some of the sites along the river, and including the one I mentioned, which is, you know, part of the new national park out on the 7th Street Peninsula area. You know, there are some very significant historic resources there that I think some other folks are going to be working on as we're working on this. So I think, you know, my thought would be to try and just have good communication and find ways that we can pull things in from each other's plans as we're thinking about. But we definitely want this plan to highlight. Our aim is to bring all of these things together and to really look at this area more holistically and have the river be a focal point, you know, for these areas. So Deb, that's definitely something I would say that we'd love to work with you on, and we're open to ideas, and we hope you'll continue to participate in the opportunities that we have to have input, but let's keep talking about that for sure.
And then also, what about all the stories from Indigenous people who lived along the river? I understand that there's a huge story that could be told, and you know, I don't personally know the story, but I want to hear the story, and perhaps there's ways that could be spotlighted. I'm sure there's ways it can.
I think that all sounds great. I just want to clarify that the Harriet Tubman connection is the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad Byway, which is a state byway. And we're going to be talking in the next year or two about application for a national scenic byway. So we will definitely be sharing the information that intersects with the rivers with you.
Excellent.
This is why I'm thinking of a statewide grant writing team, because it's not, you know, I thought of environmental grant writing, but it could be everybody. I mean, just take all the grant writers from every organization, introduce them to each other, and get them working as a team, because somebody might see an opportunity and think, well, that's not for us. But then how do you bring that opportunity to somebody else in the state who can apply for it? And how some of these are short time frame. And so you got to be quick and think about what agency or organization would be the best lead for it, and then twist their arm until they say yes, and then write the grant for them and go.
Marion, that's a great point, and I kind of think that multifaceted team, you know, I could envision someone doing a historical grant application and potentially running afoul of a contaminated property, or the question of whether or not it was contaminated, and saying, how do we get past that? And if we have our team multifaceted, someone can step in and say, here we are, we can go do the sampling so we can get this grant and we can do this thing so all these opportunities aren't missed. Because I think a lot of times there's one or two variables that stops even an application of going in. Yep. And you know, we are the informed group and we can do that. So a great point.
So I see that Betsy and Claudia have had to sign off, and I just wanted to give a big, huge thank you to both of them for joining us today, even if they're not still with us, so that everyone else can hear, though, that we really appreciate, and it's been fun working with them on that. We've got some good comments in the chat. I'm just scrolling through looking for questions. Anyone have any other questions about the CBR4 project? Or now the conversation in the chat is that we're now moving on to CBR5. So the next time you hear from us, we may have a new, and maybe that's how we'll do it, Marion. We'll just have different versions. And at some point we'll be up to like CBR 100 or, you know, CBR 50 or something.
As long as it brings in more partners, have at it. That sounds good.
John Williams is saying that rowing starts with an R. Just keep adding R's. Are there any, I can't see everyone who's on. So if there are any hands up for questions, if you want to just unmute yourself and jump in. And still see we still do have a good group of people on, although.
Let's go, if we don't have actual questions, let's just go around the room. Jen, call on people and just ask, what did you learn today? What do you think is cool about this project? Because that's going to be super important to preserve that kind of comment at this point in time.
So let's see, who can I pick on that? Oh, people are dropping like flies now, Marion. So I see Lorraine is on, and Lorraine has been involved with the Conservancy for quite some time. Lorraine, do you want to chime in? Is there anything that you? No. How about I was just about to switch to Andrew Holmesy with the university. I saw that Jerry Kaufman chimed in earlier about finding refinding an old report about the Christina and the Brandywine. And I don't know if Andrew, if you're actually on, if you want to.
I'm on.
All right.
Thanks, guys, for such an informative and chock-a-block set of presentations. It was really great to see some old stuff and some new stuff, and to see the timeline. I think that was really important. And Marion's idea of having sort of a bank of expertise on grant, you know, as things arise, remember the whole ARRA when it was all about shovel-ready projects, you know, getting